Okay, so now we're on to the processing, and what that is basically making the vocals you've got sound good and ready for release. So in this we'll talk about the plugins we use and different effects that can go on vocals to make them sound right. So one thing that you can do a lot of, that we do quite a lot, sometimes you try things and it doesn't necessarily work, is taking a short phrase or a short section of a song or a hook line and repeat that, put it in somewhere, make it sound different to what it does the rest of the song.
We tried this for the intro of this song, and it ended up being replaced by the vocoder thing, but this is the sort of thing.
So we didn't end up using this in the song, but this is the sort of thing that can be done quite a lot. So start off by just showing you the part of the song we used as it is with nothing on it.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
So as you can hear, it's just that one line. We put some autotune on it to make it sound more perfect and electronic-y, because with this stuff you want it to sound a bit different, and it's okay for this to sound electronic, like it's almost a synth or a computer that's made the sound.
And that was on full autotune there.
That was full autotune there, so if you listen again,
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
so you can hear the gaps between the notes. There's quite a lot of jumping about and it sounds very autotuned electronic, but that's fine sometimes if you want that. Good to try stuff out. With this, we thought that sounded cool, but you can make it sound a bit different. So in Logic, if you go over to the left here, when you're on this region in your track, you get these options up, and flex pitch has to be turned on. So if you go up here, turn flex on, which is format shifting. It basically changes the sound of it. So I'll change this below and above what it's currently at. So when it's set to 0, nothing's happening to it, and it creates a different effect when you lower the format shift and when you put it higher. So if I put this down to -3, let's hear what it sounds like.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
So sounds like that, really common in dance music. Can use that a lot. Also in octaves, if you've recorded the octave below something, it can sound quite cool to put the format shifting down to make it sound more atmospheric and sort of dark sounding. Or you can put it higher, which maybe isn't as common to use, but it makes it sound a bit more squelched and high end.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
So just with this one slider of options here, you can do quite a lot to the sound of it. With this one, what we also tried was transposing it up an octave, and instead of recording something up or down an octave, it can be really effective to record it at the original pitch and shift it up. So if you just put this +12 semitones, which is an octave above, it now sounds like this.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
And what we did to that, we kept that there in the demo that we tried it in. Once it's shifted up an octave, putting the format shift down can also counter that to make it sound a bit more cool.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
So
that also makes it blend a little bit more in the mix, so it's not too sort of high end and piercing.
It sounds very harsh. And also what you want, we've got the rest of these plugins here that we'll talk about later on in the video when we talk about the plugins for our lead vocals. But in this, we've got in particular the EQ can be different. So this is a low cut that we have on everything, because basically the sound down here in vocal parts is quite muddy and low end. You can sometimes have this higher depending on what sounds good, but we usually have this sort of around 200 Hz region, have a 12 decibel per octave low cut. It's not too steep, just takes away a bit of that muddiness. And on the high end here, if you listen to this, because it's an octave above, if we boost the high end, you'll hear how piercing it can sound.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
So you get that sort of grainy, sort of, you can really harsh sound, you can feel that. So we dip this quite a lot. By doing that, you just double click on here, you can make a new adjustment, and up or down, you've got settings here for putting the gain up or down, and the Q, changes how wide a band it is. And you can also change whether it's just a bell like that, or you get a low shelf, high cut, loads of different options to choose from. They basically all just do slightly different things. So a high cut like this basically cuts the audio down so that you can't hear any higher than where this line is. But for this one, we've just got a high shelf. So we dipped that high end and it makes it sort of sound more smooth and not as piercing. So we'll play this without this EQ and then with it to hear the difference.
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
And then when we cut that high end a bit,
Tell me I'm not wasting my time.
just so it's not as harsh on the ears. and we added reverb to this that was pre-fader. We'll talk more about this in the mixing part, but when you turn this sound down, it can sound completely different to the original version of what you recorded. So it sounds like this. So as you can hear with that, it sounds completely different to what you started with. Things like that can be really cool to put in and throughout the verse or chorus or wherever you want in the song to have something interesting, a sort of earworm to remind you of that melody, but sounding a bit different.
This is also a really cool thing to do for like maybe like a sort of call and response thing in the verse, for example. So if you had a lyric that was like, and here we go, you then have like a here we go thing in the background. And it just sort of brings the song to life a little bit. And as Mark said, it's just little earworms that just sort of catch the listener.
Yeah. So now on to the EQs and everything that we use to basically just the plugins to make the vocal parts sound good. So I'll solo this verse and play through a bit at the start of it to let you hear what it sounds like without anything on it.
Sorry, we should say as well, this vocal chain, which is what you call the thing down the left here, is a preset one that we've made, which as you can see here is called lead vocal, and it just means whenever we make a track, we just set it to that, and it means that these are all set here, and then we'll just make small adjustments to suit whatever the song needs. But that's a vocal chain that we made so that it's nice and easy just to jump onto that whenever we're recording.
Yeah. So this is what this vocal sounds like with nothing on the vocal chain yet.
I don't have the answer. I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away because every...
So it doesn't sound amazing, just sounds literally as it was recorded into the mic. Quite a lot of noise, muddiness, it doesn't really stand out much. And if you put that into the instrumental, it wouldn't sound very good. So this is basically the way you make that sound nice and appealing to someone listening to a DJ or whatever. So the first thing in our vocal chain is a noise gate, and Logic has stock vocal gate, noise gate, and all of these plugins, the compressors and EQs that we use are FabFilter. They do cost money, but they make it a bit easier than the stock ones from Logic, but Logic does have them and they're very similar to use.
Yeah.
So everything we're talking about in these you can also do in Logic.
The main thing that's great about the plugins that FabFilter do is basically just the presets are really good.
Yeah.
So you can basically set a preset and then just make small changes rather than having to start from scratch.
Yeah. So the noise gate, what that does is if you've got bits of noise in between when you're actually singing, the noise gate's job is to cut those bits out. And so that can be breaths or whatever it is, movements around the mic if you've got a line then a gap. For this, we didn't actually need one because we'd cut out the gaps in comping stage of it. But they can be helpful if you've got a lot of vocals together, so you don't need to go through and comp all of them. A lot of presets can do a really good job. Vocal all round this is. A lot of different ones to choose from. Basically the main thing to adjust is the threshold. So what this means is the level at which the noise gets cut out. So here we've got -45. All that means is when the noise level gets to that, it starts dipping it even more. So background ambient noise, and basically it's about listening and working out at what level that comes in the room that you're using. So you can use that to cut out the sounds.
And you'll remember from the editing video that we talked about how we cut breaths out and stuff like that between words. So it's good because if you're not overly relying on the noise gate, it means that you can just apply it subtly. Whereas if you were trying to get rid of big breaths, you're going to have to put that on quite heavily, and then it's going to start affecting how the vocal part sounds.
Yeah, and outside of vocals, these can be really helpful for particularly guitars and instruments that have a lot of noise between when you're actually playing. They just dip the extra noise that you don't necessarily want. The next one we have is autotune. So we usually use autotune just to listen once we've done a few takes of recording to hear if it sounds okay. So you can change it between slow, medium, fast, the different levels, and basically how auto-tuned it sounds.
Fast being the most auto-tuned sounding.
Yeah, and slow meaning it doesn't do tons, but it just kind of bumps the pitch to the nearest proper whole note. Don't usually use this on lead vocals for the whole song because it's not perfect, but it's good to listen back when you've taken a few takes to see if it sounds good or not, and then put it off and use your pitch editing later on.
Also that was just the Access one, which is the most basic version of the Antares autotune that we've got. You can get a more advanced one that does slightly more precise autotuning, but we prefer to just do the editing ourselves for the most part for tuning.
Yeah. And the first EQ we're going to have here is literally a low cut. So you can do this in Logic's stock EQ as well. I'll just go into that here. The channel EQ in Logic looks very similar. You would just go down here, this is your low cut, and bring it to about there. This is going to be doing roughly the same thing as this is going to be. Not much difference. This is just a bit more, it looks a bit nicer. The presets are more fancy.
It's easier to use.
We find it easier to use, yeah. But so the first thing with an EQ, we have a couple of these on. You can do quite a lot on the one, but we find it easiest to have one EQ to just get rid of the low end that we talked about before. Sounds a bit muddy, you don't really want this, so I'll play a bit. And what you can do in this is solo everything that's being cut out, so you know what you're getting rid of. And we'll play this and show you what low end we're removing.
I don't have the answer. I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away because every time you're stuck in my mind.
So you can hear when you slide that up there, it just basically gets rid of different levels of low noise. You don't want that. So we dip the low end a bit, and then these two are just bells that we made quite slight there. You don't want to dip it too much, basically to get rid of bits of mud and rough sound that you don't want in the vocals. So these depend on the singer. So for this, we worked out where the bits of noise were and got rid of them. So to do this, you play a section and basically solo that part of the frequency. So I'll do that for a second to show you what we mean.
I don't have the answer.
So if you listen to that, you hear the sort of whistly sound that's quite piercing, and you don't notice that when you play the full thing, but when you solo a part of it, you can really hear that it's quite harsh, and when you have a lot of vocals doing that, they can add up and you start getting harsh noises in the total mix.
And you can boost the this here to sort of really hear it clearly. If you're struggling to hear, you can put this up. So we can go like that.
I don't have the answer.
So you can really hear that.
Yeah. I wouldn't usually dip anything more than sort of a couple of decibels. You don't want to take away too much of the natural sound, but dipping that slightly can get rid of some ugly noises that you don't want later on.
Yeah, and it wouldn't always just be 2. You would maybe need more than that. You would just sort of search by boosting little bits and soloing and listening until you find, until you've got rid of all the things that are causing interfering noise.
Yeah. The next thing we have is another EQ. So this one's to sort of shape the sound of the vocals. So you can see there's a lot more going on. What this is, we have another low cut that's not as steep that comes in. Basically, move this to where you think it needs to be. You don't always need this, and you can have your main low cut on this, but we just quite like having a separate one because it means that this can just be about making the vocal sound nice and bright, make it sound good. So first things we have, that, as you'll see here, this was initially a preset in FabFilter for vocals, just one of the vocal lead ones. Some of them can sound really good. The same with Logic's stock ones. You can get presets and just basically alter them to fit what your vocal sounds like or what the song is like from there. So starting with a preset and then adjusting from there can be really helpful. So low cut, we're boosting the bass a bit here. And again, these are dynamic. So what that means is they sort of bring any extra boost down a little bit if it gets too heavy. So you just go in here and make them dynamic, and it means that you can do that to sort of boost it a bit more when it gets to this level, or what this one is dipping it so that if that gets a bit too bassy, the dynamic means it bumps it down again so it doesn't get too much.
Yeah.
And here sort of boosting it slightly but then also lowering it to make it sound more clean, because there's a lot of muddy noise in the mid sort of area that is really, it can be quite hard to get rid of in the mixing stage. A lot of people will do it in the mixing stage and then also mastering later on. You need to keep trying getting rid of mid noise. It can really help to get rid of this as early as possible.
Yeah.
So down here you'll hear, if I play this again in solo, this mid section, you'll hear the difference when I solo this mid part.
I don't have the answer. I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away because every time you're stuck in my mind.
So it can sound
I don't
quite
have the answer.
messy.
I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away, cause every time you're stuck in my mind.
And you hear it sounds quite thin and high end, but that's what you want. So you always want to compare when you're mixing vocals to the instrumental you're doing it with.
Yeah.
So on its own, this can sound quite thin, but it usually does stand out enough in the vocal, in the full mix when you've got the instrumental there, because there's a lot of mids and a lot of instruments in the instrumental. So balancing that and the vocal being the bright thing at the high end is really important. So we've got high shelf on here. So you go in here, settings, the shape of that, high shelf. Basically, starting from level, I'll play that and then show you the difference when we boost it, and you'll hear how nice and bright it sounds. And this is really how you get vocal to stand out in a mix above the instrumental.
I don't have the answer, I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away, cause every time you're stuck in my mind. I don't have the answer.
So that's that part. It sounds almost radio-like, really thin, high-end, but that's how you get vocals to stand out. And again, making this dynamic to just bring it down slightly so it doesn't sound too pushed. But equally, what can be done quite a lot, if you have potentially backing vocals or something, you want to stand out and sound nice and airy, or if you've got group vocals, boosting this more can make it sound really nice, airy sound to make it stand out separately from the lead vocal. So we'll just play this again.
I don't have the answer, I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away, cause every time you're stuck in my mind. I don't have the answer.
So you can hear the difference there when you move that. And again, it's all about trial and error. Making it sound good is the most important thing. It doesn't really matter how you get there. So using plugins like this, try out different things, get used to it, use presets and change them, see what sounds best. And also comparing to vocals that are recorded in songs that you like and know is really helpful. So referencing against that, so having something playing and then swapping between what you're doing, and dip the mid a bit more or less where you think you maybe need to. If you've got someone with a really bassy voice, you might need to cut a bit more of the low end so it doesn't sound too low end. If you've got a female vocal, you might want to enhance the sort of high end parts of it, but equally you might need to dip the highs more if it sounds really high end. So it's all about trial and error. Every voice is different, and backing vocals you maybe want at a slightly different point. So if I go on, before we go on to the next point in compressors, if you go on to the octaves, you can really push them more or less. The octaves can sound different. You might need a different EQ on them than you do for the lead parts because they sound so different. So
quite often, if you listen to just the a cappella of our backing vocals, they sound really, really high end.
Yeah.
And they would sound really thin, but that actually works really well because you don't want them to be too full. If they sounded the way, like as full and rich as a real voice does, just naturally going into a mic, it would clutter the mix way too much. Whereas they're much more subtle if it's just high end.
Yeah. And the next thing we have in our chain is a compressor. So the first compressor we use, very similar to Logic's stock compressor that you've got different options in. We're really just rounding the sort of shape of the first one, so having the ratio down somewhere between 1 and 2, keeping it quite light. So what the ratio is basically how much it compresses the audio. So when it's playing, if you have the ratio really high, when the compressor comes into play, the audio will get completely squashed and it'll sound like when the vocal should get louder, it sounds like it dips a lot. So you don't want that too high. So having this somewhere between 1 and 2 seems to be quite a good level. Threshold, again, as we had with noise gates, is the level at which the compressor comes into play. So the compressors with the threshold, it does the opposite of a noise gate. So a noise gate, the threshold is below that the noise gate comes into play. With a compressor, it's the threshold above which it gets compressed. So we have the threshold here. Listen and work out. So you'll hear, if I play a second and put the ratio up, you'll hear what the compressor is actually doing.
I don't have the answer, I don't have a way to find.
So you hear how much that's getting dipped, and you can see it in the graph here, it's coming down a lot. So obviously you don't want it to sound like that because it sounds really squashed.
I don't have the answer, I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away because every time you're stuck in my mind.
So there, you bring it higher up so that it's not really noticeable that it's being compressed, because, you know, if you're listening to a song and you can hear the vocals being compressed, then there's too much compression on it. Boosting the gain a bit as well can help, because as you can see here, the wave for this isn't that big. It's not that loud. The recording wasn't really loud. So boosting the gain a bit can help quite a lot. Just pad that out and make it sound a bit full. Again, attack is basically how fast the compression comes on. So if you have a really fast attack, that can make your vocal sound more punchy, but it can sometimes make it get too loud or do too much compression. So having a slightly slower attack can make it sound more smooth and round. So getting a balance fairly quick for lead vocals, but not too quick that it sounds harsh. And the release is how fast it comes off at the other end. And this as well, we've sidechained this. So what that means is the compressor only affects the high end part of this. So having this sort of mid-level, because we've already done a lot and cut out a lot of this low end, we didn't need to do as much compression to the low end of it. So again, just listening to it and changing these sliders about. You don't need to sidechain the compressor, but it can help quite a lot with making the vocal sound nice and rounded. The next thing is de-essers. So de-essers basically get rid of the S and T sound. So if you've got a lot of the sibilance in your voice there, sounds quite harsh, and a lot of mics, depending on them, can sound really harsh in a final recording. So when you've got a de-esser on a vocal, what that does is dips those sounds. And again, presets, we've got a male band here based on the average male vocal. Depending whether you're higher or lower sounding, you might need to adjust things, but shouldn't too much. The threshold again is just where that comes into play. So we'll play this without and with a de-esser.
I don't have the answer. I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away 'cause every time I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer.
So you can hear that there when you've got the t sound of don't. It gets dipped slightly when you've got the de-esser on. Yeah. Again, really slight changes to it, just making it sound that bit more professional. Don't need to do too much de-essing. If you do need an absolute ton, you've probably not recorded well enough. Usually it should just be a slight alteration later on to get rid of some sounds.
The key with all of the stuff in the vocal chain is just like really small changes. You just want everything to be subtle, and it should all just gradually make the vocal just sound really nice and perfect.
Yeah. And finally on the vocal chain we have another compressor that is basically to bring it all together. So once you've got these EQs, compressor, de-esser all together, you've basically got a vocal that still sounds quite open because the de-essing is happening after that last compressor. So to bring it all together at the end, this final compressor, basically a lot of what this does is makes it louder, because rather than just turning the volume up using a compressor, turns it up in a more controlled way. So we've got the ratio a bit higher here. You can have this anywhere between 2, 3, 4 sort of. You can go higher, but you shouldn't need to if you've done the previous steps. So again, we've set this to a preset of up front vocal, doesn't do too much, basically really quick attack, fairly fast release, bit of boost in the gain, so listen to it, see if it's falling short of 0 decibels in the compressor. So if you want to get it to the level of the threshold where the compressor comes into play, boost the gain a bit. And the threshold here, again, set that so that it comes into play but you don't hear it too much. So I'll play this and adjust the threshold and let you hear the difference.
I don't have the answer. I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away 'cause every...
So you hear that, the word falling, when it comes in it's quite loud. You'd think it would get louder, but the compressor comes into play way too much, so it dips the sound far more than it needs to.
I don't have a way to find. I'm falling away 'cause...
And yeah, having this set up here sort of so that when the louder bits come, it dips it enough to be a sort of steady level of volume, but not too much that you hear it. It's all about finding a balance with compressors. And we'll compare this without the compressor to with as well.
I don't have the answer. I don't have a way to find.
So you hear how much more bright and upfront that sounds. Basically, it's just boosting the levels where it needs to be and dipping it where it has to be dropped slightly. Not too much complicated stuff with this last compressor.